I'm Yurigo, and today I'm going to talk to you about something that's very underrated and underutilized in the composing community. It's called timbre. In short, timbre is the tone color or the sound that is made when multiple instruments play at once. Well, in honesty, it's just the sound that any instrument makes. Every single instrument has its own timbre, but we're talking about it more in the sense of blending tone colors together. This neglect for tone color probably started from the synthetic sounds that didn't blend great back in the day, the chip tune kind of stuff. Or more likely the lack of audio channels on hardware, such as NES or Game Boy, not allowing composers to actually layer musical tracks. Regardless, nowadays I very rarely see composers ever layering musical instruments together, and if they do it, they only do it to make the note louder, which is ridiculous because you can just turn up the fader. So I'm going to do this video in two parts. The first part just showing some of my favorite timbres that I've used a lot and ones that I've used recently. The other part going to show you how you can kind of make these timbres yourself. This is perfect for melodies in soft, calm pieces. It has a very clear melody thanks to the attack of the harp, but the breathiness of the flute softens the sound, and the vibrato of the violin, the solo violin I should say, brings a delicate feeling to it. It's really important that all three of these instruments are solo. So this one only really works to the low to mid register of the clarinet when it becomes this really warm and woody tone. So when you write, it's really important that you keep in mind the register of the clarinet. This is going to be a common factor for a few of these, and it's going to be really important when we start thinking about how to create our own. So a common trait on pretty much all instruments is the lower they are, the warmer they sound. But as the clarinet really ties everything together, it's most important that you keep that one in mind. To demonstrate this, as you'll see here, when the clarinet goes to its B, our A, it loses a lot of that warmth and tone in the sound. Ignore that note there. I'm sure you heard it's still not a bad sound, and it is a nice sound, but it's no longer this warm, like sitting in front of a fire kind of feel to the tone color. This is basically because there's an octave key on the back of the clarinet, and this lets some air out, which I don't know how exactly it works. And then when you... So I've dubbed this one the Regal horn because it sounds really posh and royal, but of course you can use it in any context you feel fit. It's really important when you do this that it's only two instruments, the oboe and the trumpet. So it's really important that neither one of those instruments is overpowering. You've probably heard that down the bottom here, I think the oboe was a bit more powerful, and up here in the top, the trumpet was a bit more powerful. But there were some points where there was a seamless transition, and you can really work it out. And of course, if you've got two players, it's a lot easier than just using virtual instruments. But you can make that work. So this one you can just simplify. You only need pizzicato strings and some wooden pitched percussion instruments. The reason is because for this video, I had the orchestra there and I included those, and I figured, I'll show you the one in full context, I guess, but there's not necessary. I'll show you here just what it sounds like with two instruments. So again, what's happening here is the pizzicato is a lovely sound, playful, light, but short. The wooden percussion is a bright sound that also has a bit better sustain than the pizzicato, and that's why they both complement each other where the other one lacks. Very common theme that you're starting to see throughout. This one is very, very specific. Unlike all the other ones that we showed, that of course they have their place, but you could really chuck any of them into any kind of context and make it work. This one is not something you could really just slip into any piece. but when it does need to happen, it's amazing. Another issue with this is it's kind of the melody and the harmony all in one. The melody is being played at every single octave, and so you need to be careful if you do want to add a harmony, which isn't really necessary, but if you choose to, that you're not going to make the sound too muddy. It's kind of a double-edged sword with these really powerful and awesome sounding tone colors, is they can cover up a lot of the spectrum and potentially make the sound a bit muddy. So how do we come up with these? Well, you need to identify the characteristics of each instrument. In the first example, we wanted a clean attack, so we used the harp. We wanted some airiness, and that makes the sound a bit more delicate, so we added the flute. And then we wanted a colorless sustain to thicken the sound. Not to be confused with making it louder, thicken the sound without making any color added to the tone. And strings are kind of perfect for that. I'll also reiterate what I said earlier, is the reason we were using solo violin is because it's a bit more intimate, and so that vibrato that happens on a solo violin comes through a little clearer, and again, helps to make the sound a bit more delicate. But that's not the main reason it's there. So we're just gonna make a very similar timbre using those exact same protocols. So clean attack, piano, airiness, shakuhachi, colorless sustain. Again, this kind of is pretty limited to the strings, as I mentioned earlier. Not completely, but for the most part, and so we're kind of restricted to just using violin. And of course, just so you can hear it without the strings getting in the way, just wanted to add some accompaniment for you. Alright, so let's put this to practice one more time. Imagine that we're writing for accompaniment for some ogre thing. He's big, he's a bit wonky. Now it's accompaniment, it's not a melody, so it's going to be lower. But again, given the description of the ogre, it's probably going to be pretty low anyway. So this kind of limits us to a few instruments. Can't be flute or piccolo, as they can't go that low. So instead, we have to limit ourselves to what we can actually play with. We're going to rule out double-reeded instruments such as bassoon or cor anglais, because whilst they have that wonky feel to them, it's a bit too cliche, a bit too obvious, and honestly a bit too comical that I'm not trying to go for in this video. By that same token, I'm going to leave out tuba and euphonium. Again, they're those brass in that lower register, but they sound a bit goofy and not super serious. And we're trying to go for, whilst not completely serious, a bit more serious, less cartoony, I guess. So I'm going to use the bass clarinet. Low, powerful, and woody. We also want to overblow it so we actually hear the buzzing of the reed. Again, this stuff's a lot easier done with actual players, but you can still make it happen with virtual instruments. Now we need something for the attack. I'm going to use a combination of pizzicato strings, Bartok picks, which again is when you really pull it back and let it slap into the neck. Ideally, I would use a kind of a combination of normal pits and Bartok, but just for the sake of ease, I'm only going to use Bartok. Again, real players are going to make this a lot easier. And piano. Finally, I'm going to use bass drum to actually thicken up this sound. What we're going to do is we're not going to hit the bass drum really, really hard. We need to think about these dynamics again. Because when you hit the bass drum too hard, you get this sharp attack. Not super sharp, it is bass drum, but you still get a sharp attack. And what we want is to hit it very, very lightly, so we just get this little rumble. And that rumble is just going to thicken up the sound. Yeah, going to thicken up the sound. Sharp attack. So it's by no means perfect, but I think it still demonstrates what I'm trying to do, and it's not awful. It's got some good things there. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more about orchestration, I really suggest the book, A Study of Orchestration by Samuel Adler. It has detailed information on every single instrument, at every single register, at every single dynamic, as well as common combinations that other famous composers have used with those instruments. And finally, it needs to be said, before someone complains because I told them to use music theory. Music theory is not rules that you need to live or die by. It is just a list of things that other composers have found have or haven't worked in certain contexts in the past. Anyway, like and subscribe and stuff.